The morning sun creeps slowly across the marble facades of Athens, casting soft golden light on the stones worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. The air is warm already, even though the trial is set to begin in the early hours. A faint breeze carries with it the mingled scents of olive oil, charcoal smoke, and the briny tang from the nearby sea. As you approach the court, the sound of voices grows, low, murmuring, almost like a hive of bees. Hundreds of Athenians gathered not for war or festival, but for something equally momentous, the trial of Socrates. The court itself is not a grand, enclosed building like those that will come centuries later. Instead, it is open to the sky. Wooden railings and stone benches form the perimeter. At the center, a raised platform waits for the magistrates, who will guide the proceedings. The jury, not a handful of robed judges, but hundreds of ordinary male citizens chosen by lot, will soon take their seats. The number is staggering. Over 500 men, each carrying the weight of Athens' justice in their vote. You step through the crowd, hearing fragments of whispered speculation. Some speak of the philosopher with admiration, a man of wisdom, a teacher whose probing questions have made them think more deeply about the world. Others frown and mutter accusations, a corrupter of youth, a blasphemer against the gods, a man who refuses to honor tradition. His name carries both reverence and suspicion. And there, near the center, stands Socrates. He is not dressed in finery. His robe is plain, his feet bare against the dusty stone. He speaks softly to those around him, the lines of his face deepened by 70 years of thought and debate. He does not pace nervously, nor avert his gaze. Instead, he studies the crowd as if it were another lesson, another opportunity to examine human nature. The murmurs quiet as a sharp wooden mallet strikes the judge's stand. The trial is about to begin. The crowd shifts, and you find yourself sitting on a cool stone bench, the air around you heavy with anticipation. This is not just a legal matter. This is a question of what kind of city Athens wishes to be, and whether it will tolerate a voice that challenges its most sacred truths. The city around you is alive, its rhythms as old as the stones underfoot. Athens in the year 399 BCE is a place of contrasts, a democracy, yet one still reeling from war and political upheaval. Less than a decade has passed since the city's walls fell to Sparta, ending the long and bitter Peloponnesian War. The shadow of defeat still lingers, like a faint scar across the marble skyline. The streets leading to the court are narrow and uneven, lined with small shops and stalls. A potter works at his wheel, shaping wet clay into elegant vessels. A fishmonger shouts the day's catch to passing customers. Merchants weigh out olives, figs, and honey, their hands moving quickly, their voices sharp. Children dart between stalls, laughing until they catch sight of the stern magistrates moving toward the court. Above it all, the Parthenon watches silently from the Acropolis, its columns gleaming in the sunlight, a reminder of Athens' former glory. To the people, it is a symbol of their devotion to Athena, protector of the city. To Socrates, it may also be a symbol of the very traditions he has spent his life questioning. You pass through the agora, the heart of civic life, where philosophers, merchants, and citizens gather to talk politics, trade, and ideas. Here, Socrates has spent countless hours questioning politicians, craftsmen, and young students, challenging them to think beyond the surface of their beliefs. Many have admired his methods, many more have found them deeply unsettling. By the time you return to the court, the jury is assembling. They are farmers, craftsmen, soldiers, men whose lives have been shaped by the city's victories and its defeats. Today, their decision will determine not just the fate of one man, but the boundaries of free thought in Athens. Before the charges, before the court, Socrates was simply a man walking the streets of Athens, engaging strangers in conversation. He never wrote books, never delivered formal lectures. His philosophy lived in the air between speaker and listener, carried in questions rather than declarations. Born in 470 BCE, Socrates grew up in a city finding its voice as a democracy. He fought as a hoplite in the Peloponnesian War, enduring the same hardships as any soldier. Yet it was in times of peace that his influence grew. His students were not only eager young thinkers but also future leaders. Men like Plato, who would later preserve his words, and Alcibiades, whose political ambitions and betrayals left their mark on Athens. To Socrates, the pursuit of truth was more than an academic exercise. It was a moral duty. He wandered the marketplace, asking questions that stripped away pretenses. He compared himself to a gadfly, a small creature that keeps a great horse awake by stinging it. Athens, he believed, was that great horse, in danger of complacency, in need of his sharp questions. But not all appreciated his presence. His method often left respected men exposed as ignorant or inconsistent. His association with controversial figures during the city's unstable political years did not help his reputation. The seeds of suspicion were planted long before the trial, watered by jealousy, misunderstanding, and fear of what his ideas might inspire. The trial cannot be understood without the politics of the time. Athens has only recently restored its democracy after a brief and bloody oligarchic rule under the 30 tyrants. That regime, supported in part by men linked to Socrates, left deep wounds in the city's trust. Even though Socrates himself had not taken part in their violence, his connections to some of their leaders were enough to cast shadows over his loyalty. The wounds of war and tyranny make Athens cautious. Leaders seek to restore stability by reaffirming the city's values: reverence for the gods, respect for tradition, and obedience to the laws. In such a climate, a man who openly questions the gods, who encourages the youth to challenge their elders, can easily be seen as a threat. Socrates' teaching style is intimate, personal, and public all at once. He does not stand on a platform to preach. He stands in the street, at the gymnasia, in the workshops, speaking to whoever will listen. For some, this is a sign of a generous teacher. For others, it is evidence of dangerous influence. The jurors know all this. They have lived through years when words led to bloodshed. As they take their seats, the thought of another upheaval, however unlikely, makes them wary, and so the trial is not simply about one man's guilt or innocence. It is about what Athens is willing to risk, for the sake of free inquiry. The mallet strikes again, and a hush falls over the crowd. Meletus, the young poet and one of Socrates' chief accusers, steps forward. His voice is clear, his expression determined. He recites the charges with a formality that carries the weight of the law. Socrates is guilty of not recognizing the gods recognized by the state, and of introducing new deities. He is guilty of corrupting the youth of Athens. The words are simple, but in them lies the power to end a man's life. Impiety, asabeia, is no small accusation in a city where the gods are woven into every public and private act. To question the gods is to question the city itself. And to corrupt the youth, that is to threaten its future. Meletus outlines his case. Socrates has filled the minds of young men with doubts about the old ways. He has taught them to question, to challenge, to see the flaws in their elders. In doing so, he has undermined the respect and obedience that keep the city strong. And by speaking of his inner divine sign, a voice that warns him against certain actions, he has introduced a new god, a personal spirit outside the pantheon of Athens. The murmurs return, heavier now. Some nod in agreement. Others glance at Socrates, searching for a reaction. But he stands still, his eyes calm, as though the words are simply another question, waiting to be answered. The second accuser, Anytus, steps forward. His presence alone seems to tighten the air in the court. He is not a poet like Meletus, nor a dramatist skilled in words and imagery. He is a politician, a man of influence, known for his role in restoring democracy after the 30 tyrants. His voice is steady, practiced in persuasion. Anytus does not waste time on elaborate flourishes. He points to the practical dangers of Socrates' influence. The city has suffered much, he says, his eyes sweeping over the jury. And yet, even after war, tyranny, and the loss of so many lives, we still have those who seek to unsettle the minds of our young men. Socrates has made it his craft to question and to mock, to bring down respected leaders, and to teach his students to do the same. The accusation is more than philosophical. It is political. Anytus reminds the jury that two of the most hated figures from the city's dark days, Critias and Alcibiades, were once associated with Socrates. If we do not stop this now, he warns, what seeds will be planted for the future? Will Athens again fall into chaos, because we failed to silence one voice when we had the chance? His tone carries weight. He speaks not of abstract ideas but of survival. The survival of the city, its laws and its traditions. And in the minds of some jurors, that survival might seem worth more than the life of one philosopher. Meletus returns to speak again, this time in greater detail. His youth is evident. His beard still sparse, his eyes sharp with conviction. Yet his confidence wavers in places, as if he is aware that he is standing against a man whose intellect is feared and admired in equal measure. He accuses Socrates of teaching that the gods of Athens do not exist, that the city's festivals, sacrifices, and oaths are meaningless. He claims Socrates has replaced them with his own strange divinity, the daimonion, the inner voice that speaks to him. If every man follows only the counsel of his own spirit, Meletus says, then what need have we of the city's gods, or its laws? Meletus also paints a picture of corruption that is not of the flesh, but of the mind. He names young men, bright, ambitious, who have left their studies of rhetoric and politics to follow Socrates in endless questioning. He tells of sons who return home, challenging their fathers at the dinner table, undermining the respect that keeps households united. There is a murmur in the crowd at this. The corruption Meletus describes is subtle, but in a city where harmony depends on deference and tradition, it is potent. Even those who admire Socrates feel the sting of doubt. What if he is sowing more unrest than wisdom? The third accuser, Lycon, is a man of the arts, a rhetorician smooth and deliberate in his speech. Where Anytus brought political weight, and Meletus the fervor of youth, Lycon brings the power of performance. His voice rises and falls like a practiced orator, drawing the jury into his rhythm. Lycon focuses less on religion or politics, and more on the craft of persuasion itself. This man, he says pointing to Socrates, is a master of making the weaker argument appear the stronger. He can twist words, turn logic upon itself, and leave a man doubting his own reason. Is this the sort of teaching we want for our sons? That they should become clever in speech, but hollow in truth? His argument is subtle, perhaps even flattering to Socrates' skill. Yet it carries the suggestion that such ability, if unchecked, could undermine the very foundation of civic life. If every citizen becomes skilled in turning the law inside out, who will obey it? If every youth learns to argue endlessly, who will act when action is needed? By the time Lycon finishes, the air is heavy. The three accusers have laid their case from different angles, each reinforcing the other. The jury sits in silence, weighing the danger of one man against the principles of their city. When Socrates steps forward at last, there is no flourish, no attempt to charm. He speaks in the same unhurried manner he might use in the marketplace, as though this were simply another conversation among citizens. His voice is clear but not raised, his words deliberate, as if each is weighed before it is released. I am not a skilled speaker, he begins with a faint smile, unless by skilled you mean one who speaks truth. I will not deceive you with ornate words. I will speak as I have always spoken, plainly, directly, and only what I believe to be true. He addresses the charges one by one. As for impiety, he reminds the court that he has never denied the existence of the gods, only questioned the stories told about them. He explains the daimonion, not as a new god, but as a divine sign, a warning against wrong action. If this is impiety, he says softly, then many who have received visions or omens from the gods must be guilty as well. On the corruption of youth, Socrates is firm. He asks Meletus to name anyone he has made worse, and whether those who have learned from him have become harmful to the city. He suggests that, if he has indeed harmed anyone, it must have been unintentional, and that the proper response would be to instruct him, not punish him. His tone is calm, almost disarming, yet beneath it lies an unshakable resolve. He will not flatter, will not beg for mercy, will not pretend to be something he is not. Socrates shifts from defense to reflection. He speaks of his divine mission, a duty as he sees it, to awaken the people of Athens to examine their lives. He compares himself again to a gadfly, sent by the gods to stir the great horse of the city from complacency. He warns that silencing him will not end the questioning. If you kill me, he says, you will not easily find another like me, one who is bound to the city not by wealth, but by the pursuit of truth. You may think it easier to silence the questioner than to answer the questions, but in time, the questions will return. His words are not designed to appease the jury. If anything, they challenge them further, to see their decision as not only a judgment of one man, but a choice about the kind of Athens they wish to be. A city that embraces uncomfortable truths, or one that seeks comfort in silence. As he speaks, the crowd listens in stillness. Outside the court, the city hums with the ordinary sounds of life, merchants bargaining, children playing, craftsmen at their work. But here, within these railings, time feels suspended. The air holds the weight of history, and the decision that will soon be made. The court shifts as the magistrates call for witnesses who might speak on Socrates' behalf. A murmur moves through the crowd. Who will dare defend him openly? In the tense political climate of Athens, Standing too close to an accused man can cast a long shadow. From the front of the assembly, a tall, broad-shouldered man steps forward. It is Plato's elder brother, Adeimantus, his gaze steady despite the hundreds of eyes upon him. His voice is calm, deliberate. I have known Socrates for many years. I have seen no harm come from his teachings. If questioning one's assumptions is corruption, then perhaps we all ought to be corrupted in this way. Others follow, fellow soldiers from Socrates, days as a hoplite, who recall his courage in battle. Younger men who speak of how his conversations turned them toward moderation, not recklessness. Their accounts are measured, each meant to paint the philosopher as a guide rather than a destroyer. Yet, for each voice of defense, there are jurors who remain unmoved. They nod politely, but their eyes suggest that, however noble Socrates may seem to his friends, the question remains, is he too dangerous for a fragile city to keep? Meletus cannot resist responding. He steps forward, quick to question Socrates directly, hoping to push him into a corner. Tell us plainly, Meletus says, do you believe in the gods of Athens? Socrates tilts his head, his eyes narrowing in thought. I believe in the divine, he replies, though not necessarily in the stories we have been told. If this is disbelief, then many poets and thinkers are guilty with me. The exchange is deliberate, almost like a game of chess. Meletus tries to provoke. Socrates answers without haste. The younger man accuses him of inventing new gods, the daimonion, the divine sign, as if it were a personal deity. Socrates counters that signs, omens, and prophetic dreams are part of Athens' own religious tradition. The jury watches closely. Some are swayed by the philosopher's composure. Others think him too clever, too skilled at bending questions into lessons. The accusers gather their final force. Anytus returns, his tone sharpened. He warns that Athens' stability is fragile, that permitting Socrates to continue will embolden others to undermine the laws. Meletus adds a note of moral urgency, appealing to the fathers and uncles in the jury. Think of the youth, he says, and what they will become if they follow this man who honors no god and respects no elder. Lycon closes with the flourish of a performer. He paints a picture of an Athens, where debate replaces action, where every man is his own judge, where no law holds because every law is questioned. Their words are chosen to ignite fear, the fear that, without decisive action, the city will unravel. For some jurors, the case has moved beyond Socrates himself. It has become a vote for order over uncertainty. When Socrates rises to speak again, the court is silent. He does not plead for his life. He does not promise to change. Instead, he addresses the jurors as men of reason. If you think that by killing me you will stop the criticism of your lives, he says, you are mistaken. More will come, sent by the gods, who will trouble you as I have. To escape examination is impossible. His words are not defiance in the common sense. They are simply the truth as he sees it. He explains that fear of death should not drive one's actions. No man knows whether death may be the greatest blessing. What matters is not living long but living rightly. He tells them he would rather obey the God who commands him to seek truth, than obey men who tell him to be silent. In this, there is an unshakable dignity. Even his enemies cannot deny the force of his conviction. The magistrates call for the vote. In the Athenian system there is no drawn-out deliberation behind closed doors. Each juror steps forward, casting a small bronze disc into one of two urns, one for acquittal, one for conviction. The sound of the discs dropping is steady, metallic, final. When the counting is complete, the result is announced. Socrates is found guilty. The margin is not overwhelming, but clear enough. A majority has chosen to condemn him. A quiet ripple moves through the crowd. Some faces are triumphant. Others are troubled. Socrates stands without visible change in his expression. To him, the verdict is not the end of the argument. It is simply the next step in the dialogue. The court moves swiftly to the next stage, sentencing. And here, the law requires something unusual. The convicted and the accusers each propose a penalty, and the jury chooses between them. The jurors settle back into their places, their verdict still fresh in the air. Now comes the strange custom of Athenian justice. The accusers and the convicted each propose a punishment, and the jury must choose. The accusers waste no time. Anytus steps forward, his voice unwavering. The penalty should be death. A hush spreads through the court. Death is the ultimate sentence, but not an uncommon one for serious offenses against the state. Many watch Socrates, expecting him to bow his head, to plead for exile, or to offer a large fine as a compromise. Instead, he rises with the same quiet composure he has held since the trial began. What do I deserve? He asks aloud, his gaze sweeping the jury. If I have indeed spent my life serving the city by questioning and guiding it toward virtue, then I deserve reward. Perhaps free meals at the Prytaneum for the rest of my days. The suggestion is met with murmurs, even laughter from some, disbelief from others. He is not mocking the court, not entirely, but he refuses to frame his life's work as a crime in need of atonement. When pressed, he finally offers an alternative, a fine of 30 minas, to be paid with the help of his friends, Plato among them. But there is no apology, no retreat from his beliefs. The jury will have to decide between the accuser's call for death and the philosopher's refusal to yield. The jurors cast their second vote, the clink of bronze discs echoing once more. When the tally is announced, it is clear, a larger majority now supports the sentence of death. Perhaps they are angered by his defiance, or perhaps they fear the example he might set if spared. Socrates listens without visible distress. He stands, and in a voice neither bitter nor afraid, he addresses the jury once more. It is not hard to avoid death, gentlemen. It is much harder to avoid wickedness, for it runs faster than death. I am slow and old, and death has caught me. You are swift and young, and wickedness has caught you. He tells them he bears no hatred for those who voted against him. They acted as they thought best, just as he has done. And yet, he warns them, silencing one voice will not end the questions. They will find that more questioners will arise, perhaps gentler, or perhaps harsher than he. His words fall into the still air like stones into deep water, rippling outward beyond the bounds of the court. The days that follow are quiet. Athenian custom allows time before the sentence is carried out, as the sacred ship to Delos is away on a religious mission. No executions may take place until it returns. Socrates spends this time in the prison, surrounded by friends and students. They plead with him to escape. A plan has even been arranged, but he refuses. To flee would be to betray all I have stood for, he tells them. I have taught that one must obey the laws of the city, even when they are unjust, unless one can change them through lawful means. To run would be to contradict my own words. When the ship returns, the end comes swiftly. Socrates is given the cup, a simple clay vessel filled with the bitter poison of hemlock. He takes it without trembling. The room is still, except for the soft scrape of the cup against the table. He drinks, then walks until his legs grow heavy. As the poison rises through him, his friends weep, but he speaks calmly. Crito, we owe a cock to Asclepius. See that it is paid. His final words, a cryptic offering to the god of healing, leave them puzzled and thoughtful. In the quiet after, the small group gathers around his still form. Some speak softly, recalling his bravery in battle, his humor in conversation, his endless patience with questions. Others sit in silence, their thoughts turning to the words he spoke only hours before. Plato, still young, watches with an expression caught between grief and determination. In the years to come, he will write down these moments, preserving the voice of his teacher, so that it will echo far beyond the walls of Athens. Outside, the city goes on as it always has. Merchants call out prices in the agora. Children play in the narrow streets. The trial, the verdict, the execution, all will become stories, folded into the city's long history. But for those who sat with him in those last hours, the memory will never fade. The first pale light of dawn slips into the world almost unnoticed, washing the stone walls of Athens in a muted gold. The city is still half asleep, its narrow streets holding the hush of night like a breath not yet released. Only the earliest risers stir, bakers tending to their ovens, fishermen returning from the harbor, and the watchmen ending their long, cold vigil. Down a quiet lane, tucked away from the bustling agora and the sunlit courts where citizens gather, stands the prison. It is not a grand fortress, nor a place of elaborate cruelty. Its walls are thick but unadorned, built more to contain than to intimidate. The air is cool within, carrying the faint scent of damp stone and the sharper tang of iron from the barred gates. Inside one of the smaller cells, Socrates sits awake. He has not risen yet from the low wooden bench that serves as both seat and bed. But his eyes are open, fixed not on any one thing, but on the dim shape of the door. He is listening, not for anything in particular, but to the way sound behaves in this early hour. The faint drip of water somewhere in the corridor, the muffled creak of a guard's sandals as he shifts his weight, the occasional sigh of the wind squeezing through a narrow window slit high above. It is not an unfamiliar environment to him. Prison, like the battlefield, is simply another setting in which a man's nature is tested. And Socrates has always been most at home in the realm of examination, whether of his own mind or the minds of others. The light in the cell grows slowly, changing from a grey-blue shadow to the warmer tones of morning. Dust motes begin to drift in the beam from the high slit of a window, dancing in lazy spirals as if reluctant to settle. They make him think, fleetingly, of the young men he has taught, restless, curious, caught in constant motion until the force of a question brings them to stillness. Beyond the prison, Athens begins to stir. A vendor's voice carries faintly through the air, calling out the first wares of the day. Somewhere closer, the hinges of a door groan open, and the smell of fresh bread mingles briefly with the less pleasant scents of the cell. Life is moving forward in the city, as it always does, indifferent to the man sitting here. Socrates leans back against the wall, his hands resting loosely in his lap. His thoughts drift not to the trial itself, but to the larger picture, the flow of life and death, the way the city has been shaped by years of war and peace, of ambition and fear. He knows the role he has played in it is small in the grand scale of time, yet not without consequence. Words, once spoken, ripple outward in ways one cannot predict. The sound of a key turning in a lock breaks the stillness. The door opens a few inches, letting in a faint draft of cooler air from the corridor. A guard appears, a man neither hostile nor friendly, simply doing his duty. He carries a clay cup of water and a small portion of bread, placing them on the floor just inside the cell before stepping back. "Morning," the guard says in a tone that suggests routine rather than conversation. Socrates nods in return. "And to you." The guard lingers a moment, perhaps out of curiosity, perhaps to see if the prisoner will speak further, but Socrates remains silent, his attention turning briefly to the cup of water, then back to the light spilling in from the window. After a pause, the guard closes the door and moves on, the echo of his steps fading into the distance. The philosopher takes the bread, breaking it into small pieces. He eats without haste, as if each bite were as much a meditation as a meal. He sips the water slowly, feeling its coolness spread through him. For many, this might be a meager breakfast. For Socrates, it is enough. Not because he has learned to endure with little, but because he has long since stopped measuring life's worth in the size of one's portions. He sets the cup aside and closes his eyes. Not to sleep, for the day has already begun, but to let his mind wander in the space between thought and dream. The warmth of the rising sun touches his feet first, then climbs gradually up his legs, his chest, his face. It is the same sun that will later cast long shadows over the agora, the same sun that will set over the Piraeus, the same sun that will rise tomorrow, whether or not he is here to see it. He breathes in deeply, filling his lungs with the cool morning air. The scent of stone and dust is familiar now, almost comforting. In this stillness, he thinks of the many mornings he has spent walking the streets of Athens, pausing in the marketplace to question a craftsman about his work, stopping by the gymnasium to watch the youth at their exercises, visiting the Stoa to engage in friendly, if spirited, debate. Those mornings were filled with the hum of life, the give and take of ideas. This morning is different, yet somehow just as valuable. The quiet gives him space to reflect without distraction. He thinks of the jury that condemned him, of the young faces in the crowd that day, and of the older ones that turned away from his gaze. He wonders how many truly understood the choice they were making, not just about him, but about themselves, about the kind of city they wished Athens to be. And yet, there is no bitterness in his thoughts, only curiosity, only the habit of asking questions, even when there is no one there to answer. The sun has climbed higher now, and the light in the cell is brighter. The air is warmer, carrying the faintest trace of the sea breeze from the distant harbor. Somewhere outside, a child laughs, a high, clear sound that cuts briefly through the layers of stone and shadow. It fades almost as quickly as it came, leaving behind a silence that feels deeper than before. Socrates shifts slightly on the bench, the wood creaking beneath him. He rests his elbows on his knees and clasps his hands together, looking once more toward the slit of the window. The strip of sky visible there is a soft, translucent blue. He knows that by evening, it will darken to the deep colors of twilight, and that in the space between those two moments, the events of the day will unfold without hurry, as they always do. Somewhere in the distance, the city bell rings out, a low, resonant sound marking the hour. It is a reminder that time is passing, as it always has, as it always will. Socrates takes another slow breath, his mind steady, his body at ease. He is ready for whatever comes, not because he welcomes it blindly, but because he has spent his life preparing for this very thing. The acceptance of what is, without fear, without regret. The day has begun. The light in the prison cell has shifted since dawn. The first thin rays of morning have now warmed into a pale gold, spreading across the uneven stone floor like a slow tide. Dust still drifts lazily in the air, stirred now and then by the faint breath of a breeze, slipping in from the narrow window slit above Socrates' head. The scent of warmed stone mingles with the faint tang of iron from the cell door's hinges. Socrates sits in the same position he held at dawn, upright, composed, his hands resting loosely in his lap. Yet the sense of stillness is different now. It is no longer the soft quiet of early morning, but the deeper stillness that comes when one is waiting for something inevitable, something approaching from the far edge of time, and drawing closer by the hour. From the corridor comes the muffled sound of voices, low, purposeful and growing nearer. The footsteps that accompany them are careful, deliberate. The guard's voice carries the soft murmur of formal politeness, the sort one reserves for guests of importance. Then, the scrape of a key in the lock, the heavy thud of the wooden bar lifting, and the hinges grown open. Plato enters. The young man is not alone in body. The guard lingers discreetly at the threshold, but he feels alone in spirit. His steps are slow, almost hesitant, as though each one must be weighed before taken. He is tall, broad-shouldered, his robe simple yet clean. His eyes, however, give away his state, dark with fatigue, the faint shadows of sleeplessness beneath them. Socrates looks up, and the smallest smile touches the corners of his mouth. "Plato," he says, his voice warm, unhurried, as though greeting a friend on an ordinary day. Plato bows his head slightly in greeting. "I came as soon as I could." "I did not doubt you would." They sit together on the low bench, the wood creaking softly under the shift in weight. For a moment, neither speaks. The silence between them is not awkward. It is the silence of people who have shared countless hours in conversation, who need no rush to fill the space with words. Plato studies his teacher's face. The lines are deeper than when they first met, the skin weathered not only by age but by years in the sun, years spent walking the streets of Athens and standing in open-air debates. And yet there is no sign of weariness in his eyes, no heaviness, no fear. If anything, they are alight with the same curiosity that first drew Plato to him. "You look at peace," Plato says finally. Socrates tilts his head slightly. Would it be fitting for a philosopher to look otherwise, at the hour when his thoughts are most needed? Plato lets the question hang between them. He has learned over years of listening that Socrates rarely asks to receive an answer. He asks so that the question itself will be examined. The young man shifts, resting his elbows on his knees. "I have been thinking of the trial," he says quietly, "of the jurors, of the way the vote went. I still believe." He stops, searching for words. "I still believe they made the wrong choice." Socrates' smile deepens just enough to be seen. "Perhaps. Or perhaps they made the only choice they could, given what they believed to be true." "Do you fault them for holding to their convictions?" "I fault them," Plato says, his voice firm, "for not seeking truth before passing judgment, for choosing comfort over inquiry." Socrates nods slowly. "And yet is that not the very thing we have spent years trying to change? This city has lived on unexamined beliefs for generations. I have been but one gadfly, stirring the horse from its slumber. Perhaps my sting was too sharp for their liking." The guard shifts slightly at the door, but neither man notices. They speak then not of escape, nor of appeals to mercy, but of the nature of justice itself. Socrates asks Plato whether justice is something that exists in nature, like the rising of the sun, or whether it is merely an agreement between men. Plato considers this, weighing examples from the trial, from the city's laws, from the stories of other lands. And then Socrates turns the question inward. If justice is the harmony of the soul, as some say, then what harm has this verdict done to mine? Plato answers without hesitation. None. You are as you were, consistent in word and deed. Socrates leans back against the wall, the cool stone pressing into his shoulders. Then perhaps justice, for me, is untouched. What remains is the city's soul, and whether it suffers or grows from what has been done. The conversation flows like this for some time. Questions without clear answers, observations that lead not to conclusions but to further inquiry. The air in the cell feels less confined as they speak, as though the walls expand outward to contain the breadth of the ideas they are exchanging. From time to time, a sound from the city filters in, the cry of a merchant selling figs, the distant ring of a hammer on metal, the soft rustle of pigeons taking flight. Each sound reminds them that life outside continues as it always has, even as the hours inside the cell dwindle. Plato eventually asks the question he has been carrying since the verdict. Do you regret it? Socrates looks at him, unblinking. Regret what? Not compromising. Not offering them what they wanted. An apology, a promise to stop speaking in the way you do. The older man shakes his head. Would you have me live as another man, one I do not know and cannot be? To live in contradiction to my own nature would be a slower death than the one they offer me. Plato feels the weight of those words settle in his chest. He has known Socrates to be steadfast, but here in this small, dim room, with the shadow of execution so near, that steadfastness feels less like an intellectual posture, and more like something immovable. A mountain in the path of a river, unshaped by the current. They talk until the light through the window shifts again, signaling midday. The guard clears his throat softly, an unspoken reminder that time is passing, that visitors do not stay forever. Plato rises reluctantly. As he steps toward the door, Socrates calls after him. Plato, do not be angry with the city. Anger blinds the eye as surely as pride. If you wish to change it, do so with patience. Speak to those who will listen. Write for those who cannot hear you in person. And remember, it is not enough to know the truth. One must live it. Plato nods, unable to speak for a moment. Then, with a final glance, he leaves the cell. The door closes and the quiet returns. But the room feels no emptier than before. The conversation lingers in the air, like the fading warmth of sunlight long after it has left the stone. The sun has climbed high over Athens, and its light pours down in bright, unbroken sheets onto the city's pale stone. From above, from the Acropolis or the high hill of the Pnyx, the streets look as they always have, narrow ribbons winding between homes, courtyards, and markets. The air shimmers faintly in the heat, and the sea glitters far off at the edge of sight. But closer to the ground, at the level of the people, there is something else, a subtle tension, a quiet undercurrent that slips between conversations and disappears when strangers draw near. It is not loud, not a clamor in the streets, but it is there, the murmurs of a city contemplating the death of one of its most recognizable voices. In the agora, the marketplace that is the living heart of Athens, life goes on much as it always does. Merchants call out their goods, figs soft with ripeness, olives gleaming in shallow baskets, amphorae of wine brought from the countryside. The scent of grilled fish drifts from a food stall, mingling with the sharper aroma of fresh-cut herbs. The clang of a blacksmith's hammer rings out from the edge of the square, each strike echoing off the surrounding walls. Yet when a passerby mentions Socrates' name, the sound seems to pull people's attention in a small, magnetic way. A man selling honey pauses mid-gesture, his ladle dripping gold into a clay pot, to tilt his head toward the speaker. A pair of women inspecting a bolt of dyed cloth glance at each other, then leaning closer to hear the details. What will they do? One woman asks in a low voice, careful not to seem too curious. It is already decided, says the man holding the cloth. The ship from Delos is due back any day now. When it does, he lets the sentence trail off, but his meaning is clear. Not everyone speaks with sorrow. There are those, traders, farmers, even a few craftsmen, who mutter that the city is better off without a man who taught the youth to question their elders. It's the young ones, says a farmer as he adjusts the rope securing his cart. They hear him talk, and suddenly they think they know more than their fathers. That's no way to keep a house in order. Near the stoa, a group of men gather in the shade, their conversation more cautious. One of them, an older citizen with a white beard and the steady voice of someone who has seen decades of the city's triumphs and defeats, speaks quietly. Killing him will not erase the questions he's asked. If anything, it will spread them farther. The others nod, but their faces are guarded. Even in agreement, there is the awareness that one must watch what is said in public. The youth of the city, the ones who have spoken with Socrates in the marketplace or followed him from conversation to conversation, are quieter still. Some stay at home, avoiding the agora entirely. Others keep to the edges, their eyes scanning the crowd as though afraid of being noticed. A few find courage in each other's company, huddled in corners to share their thoughts. He's not guilty of anything, one insists, his voice barely above a whisper. He only asked questions. They don't want questions. Another replies bitterly. They want obedience. The young man shrugs, but there's no conviction in it. The conversation dissolves into silence, the way a fragile spark of fire dies in a gust of wind. Beyond the agora, in the narrow streets where workshops open directly onto the road, talk of Socrates is more matter of fact. A potter shaping clay on his wheel pauses to tell his apprentice. The philosopher will drink the hemlock soon. That's what comes from making enemies of the wrong people. There is no malice in his tone. Just the flat acceptance of someone who has seen the city's politics take stranger turns before. Up in the gymnasia, where men train their bodies and their minds, the talk is more conflicted. Some argue that the philosopher's death will be a tragedy, a wound to Athens' claim of being the home of free thought. Others see it as necessary discipline, a reminder that even the brightest minds must bend to the will of the laws. Meanwhile, in the women's quarters of many homes, the murmurs take a different form. Mothers recall seeing Socrates walking with their sons, speaking in that measured, patient voice of his. Some remember the spark in their children's eyes after such encounters, a spark of curiosity that was both exciting and unsettling. They wonder now if that spark will be dimmed, or if it will smolder in secret, hidden from the gaze of those who would stamp it out. By mid-afternoon, the murmur has spread to the city gates. Travelers coming and going carry the story outward, to the port of Piraeus, to the nearby villages, to other cities entirely. The name of Socrates moves like a small, persistent current in the greater tide of news. War in one place, trade in another, and here, in Athens, the impending death of a philosopher. At the harbor, sailors speak of it in the open, less cautious than those in the city center. He's the one who taught people to think for themselves, isn't he? Asks a man unloading amphorae from a ship. That's the one, replies another, hoisting a rope over his shoulder, and the city thinks that's dangerous. By the time the sun begins to tilt westward, the air over Athens feels heavier. The streets are still full, the market still loud, but beneath it all, there is a sense of expectation, as though the city itself is holding its breath. In the prison, Socrates may not hear all the words being spoken, but he would not be surprised by them. He has always known that the true currents of a city are felt not in the speeches of its leaders, but in the quiet exchanges of its people. Night will bring its own voices, its own rumors, but for now, the city murmurs in daylight, caught between its routines, and the knowledge that soon, one of its most familiar figures will be gone. Evening drifts down over Athens like a slow sail settling into windless water. From the narrow window slit high in the prison wall, the last, thinnest ribbon of sunlight slips away, leaving the room in a soft gray that seems to hush even the scrape of a sandal or the sigh of the doorpost. The day has been long with quiet visits and longer with thought, and now the air cools, stone giving back a little of the heat it gathered beneath the sun. Somewhere beyond the walls, a vendor calls the final prices of the night. Then even that fades, replaced by the murmur of distant voices, and beneath it, the steady pulse of a city that will not sleep all at once. Socrates lies back on the low bench, his hands folded upon his chest, as if he were arranging not his limbs but his attention. For years he has counseled others to examine themselves. Now he observes his own drifting mind as if it were a friend crossing a threshold. He does not clutch at wakefulness. He allows it to loosen, thread by thread, until the nearness of sleep is not a drop but a gentle untying, of room, of wall, of breath. When the dream comes, it comes as a shore. He is standing at the edge of water at dawn, though he feels the hour more than he sees it. The light is pearly, not quite day, and the sea lies so still that the horizon seems stitched to the sky. The sand under his feet is cool and fine. He looks down, and sees not footprints but a shallow trace, like a line drawn with the dull edge of a stylus. He recognizes nothing and everything. A shore he has never visited that wears the mood of places he has known. The Piraeus in early morning. The banks of the Ilissos when the cicadas have not yet remembered their song. A figure stands a little way off, neither near nor distant, only where it must be to be noticed without demand. At first it is only the sense of a person, posture, attention, the gentle weight of a gaze tided toward him. Then the figure resolves into a woman clothed in light the color of morning wool, neither rich nor poor, neither young nor old. The face is clear and yet refuses memory's hammer. It will not be nailed to any single name. Socrates does not approach. He has no need. The distance between them feels like the distance a question keeps from an answer so that both remain alive. Socrates, she says, and the sea says the same word a heartbeat later, as if repeating a lesson to itself. Her voice is not loud. It is what water would sound like if it could speak in one's own tongue. He waits. He has learned the patience of listening. Even here. You have practiced the art you were given, she says. Now make music of your making. And in 3 days, you will arrive where the waking cannot sail. The words do not clang like an oracle's riddle. They land with the softness of advice a mother might offer a child at a doorway. Make music of your making. He hears in the phrase the old dream that visited him many times in youth, an admonition to practice music, which he had always interpreted as the highest music, the work of philosophy itself. He recalls, as if remembering something he has not yet done, the brief hymns he has lately set to verse, the fables turned into measured lines to satisfy the plain meaning of an old command that never stopped speaking. Where shall I arrive? He asks, but the question is not urgent. It floats as a leaf floats, not to reach a destination, but to reveal the current that carries it. In the quiet field where speech is completed, the woman replies, and where what you have kept tuned does not fall into disrepair. She lifts one hand, not to point, but to include the entire brightness beginning at the horizon. Do not confuse the silence there with emptiness. It is the silence of instruments at rest, not of broken strings. Socrates turns, and the shore is a slope of olive trees. The sea remains at his left shoulder, constant, like a thought that will not be ruffled. Between the trees the ground is quilted, with small white blossoms, he does not know by name. And where the light touches them, they seem to glow from their own middles. He walks without feeling his feet. The path does not wind, it unfolds, always the same short distance ahead, like understanding that comes not through leaps, but steady recognitions. As he goes, he hears voices that are not outside him, and not within him. They are exactly where questions are born. Some are voices of those he has asked hard things in the marketplace, craftsmen, generals, poets. Not their words, not full sentences, only the timbres, the proud, the cautious, the offended, the relieved. Others are voices of the young who have walked beside him, Platon, and Adeimantus and Xenophon, and many more whose names will never be written. He does not see their faces, but the music of their willingness and their resistance accompanies him as naturally as his shadow once did. He stops beneath an olive whose trunk is gnarled into the shape of an old hand. On one of the lower branches a small lyre hangs from a thong of leather, as if someone had left it there to season in the morning air. He understands without surprise that it is meant for him. He lifts it. It is light. When he plucks a string, the note shivers into the quiet, like a drop breaking the surface of a perfectly still bowl. Make music of your making, the woman had said. He sits at the olive's roots, and begins to sound the strings one by one, and then in pairs, and then in a slow pattern that is neither a melody he has learned, nor an invention he must force. The sound is simple, no runs, no cleverness, only intervals spaced widely enough that each has its own room to rest. As he plays, he notices that the shore and the grove, the sea and the light, the breath of the world, all keep time with him. It is not that he leads and they follow, nor that they lead and he follows. It is the sort of agreement one sometimes finds in good conversation, when each person removes an obstacle from the other's thought. A question arrives the way a breeze does, lightly, and then more. If this be a dream, of what use is it to the waking? He does not scold himself for the question. He lets it sit beside him like a second instrument. He has always mistrusted those dreams that inflate fear or flatter desire. He has trusted more those that neither agitate nor indulge, that move the soul to the place where it can see without squinting. This one feels like that. He plays another note and remembers a story he told his friends. How a divine sign, a daimonion, has often warned him away from certain words or acts. It never urged him to do, only forbade what would ring false. The dream's voice has a different character. Not prohibition but completion. Not do not, but finish well. The difference pleases him. It is like the difference between not drinking bitter water and being offered clear. Ahead, the trees thin. Between two rows of trunks he glimpses a small stream, narrow as a seam, running over pale stones. On its far bank, light spreads upon what might be a field. He stands and goes toward it, the lyre balanced in the crook of his arm. The water is shallow. He steps through it, and his sandals remain dry, the way sandals often are in dreams, because the mind declines to be distracted by wet feet. On the other side, the field reveals itself, not endless, not boundless, but sufficient, like a thought that fits its subject exactly. Figures move slowly in that brightness, each attended by a soft task. Binding sheaves, laying out cloth, turning a pot on a wheel that never seems to wobble. No one hurries. No one slumps. It is not the stiffness of ceremony, nor the slackness of idleness. It is the pace of care. When a person looks up from what they are doing, their face wears the ease of one who has arrived at a conclusion he can live in. One of them, perhaps the same woman, perhaps not, turns to Socrates and inclines her head. He feels the gesture as a welcome rather than a summons. She lifts her palm, and in it there is a small cup, plain clay, the color of dry earth. For a fleeting instant he thinks of another cup, the one that waits for him beyond the threshold of waking, and he does not flinch. The plainness of this one cleanses the thought of fear. She offers it, and he takes it. The liquid within is cool, and tastes faintly of something like thyme and rain. It touches his mouth and seems to go, not down his throat, but outward, like a word spoken to exactly the right listener. The field where speech is completed. He recalls, and understands that completion is not the silencing of questions, it is their ripening. What has been asked has found soil enough, water enough, time enough. Some questions become fruit, others, seed. The rest return to ground, to feed the roots of future growth. Nothing is wasted. Even the unanswered does not spoil, it sweetens the earth. He does not know how long he remains there. The dream preserves no clocks. He hears, or thinks he hears, the smallest of choruses. Pitches as clean as morning bells thread the air. The tones are not from the lyre he holds. They are from all the careful work around him. Thread drawn through cloth, straw tightening under cord, wet clay shaping itself around steady hands. He is reminded that music is not only sound, it is any act done in proportion. At length, the woman, if woman she is, speaks again, but her lips do not move, and the words do not enter through the ear. 3 days, she says, neither warning nor comfort, simply the condition under which ripening completes. Do not crowd them with haste. Do not empty them with despair. Fill them with what you have always given, attention. He nods. He does not promise. There is nothing to promise. To attend is not a vow. It is a posture. A wind rises, not strong, not cold. It passes across the field, and the trees, and the shallow stream, and the shore, without lifting dust. It touches the strings of the lyre in his arm, and they answer softly without his hand. The figures keep working. The light keeps being light. He closes his eyes and opens them, and the shore is again the shore, the hour again the hour before day. A single gull crosses the far sky like a sentence in a clean hand. When he wakes, the prison is a room again, its dimensions returned, its window a faithful slit. The light tells him it is still night, but not the beginning of night. He estimates, with the same unproud accuracy by which he once judged the hours of March, that dawn is a little nearer than evening. He lies still, letting the fragments of the dream settle into a shape that will not be lost when he rises. Some dreams are like chalk upon a damp wall. This one feels etched. He thinks, not greedily, that he will be able to tell it. Footsteps come and go in the corridor. There is a brief murmur. 2 guards exchanging a remark not meant for the prisoner. Socrates turns onto his side and sits up. The bench answers with its mild complaint. He draws his cloak up over his shoulders and laughs once, very quietly, at the thought that even laughter has its measure, and that he would not want to leave the world having laughed either too much or too little. He considers the old injunction that visited him in youth, practice music, and the small verses he composed in these last days to satisfy the literal sense. He is content that he did not betray philosophy in doing so. If philosophy is the greatest music, then it is also right to admit that smaller music can tune the instrument for the larger. A city, a soul, an argument, each must be kept in tune if it is to hold its own weight without collapsing into noise. He stands and goes to the door, not to rattle it, not to call for anyone, only to nestle his back against the wood and feel its grain through his cloak. He speaks aloud, not loudly, as a man might speak to a house he is leaving after many years. Make music of your making. The phrase fits in his mouth, as if it had always been kept there for a night such as this. Time passes, though not quickly, like a boat that must respect every wrinkle of the water. He sits again and rests his hands in his lap. He does not try to sleep a second time, but if sleep comes, he will not deny it. He thinks of the young men who will return in the morning. Crito with his urgency, others with their questions, Plato with his steady grief under discipline, and he prepares the gentleness he will need for them. Gentleness is also a kind of music. When the first thin grey of dawn leans against the window, a swallow's cheep needles the silence. The sound is so small that in any other room it would be lost. but here it draws a neat seam between night and morning. Socrates lifts his face toward it. He does not bow. He does not reach. He simply receives it, as he has tried to receive each hour of his life. Shortly after, the key will turn, and the day will begin to be what it must be. Before it does, he arranges the dream into 3 pieces he can hand to his friends as one might hand bread. The shore that felt like every honest beginning, the woman's sentence, "Make music of your making," and the measure of 3 days, not to be rushed or emptily endured, but filled with attention. He does not decide what the dream means. He lets it mean itself, the way a well-made cup means itself, whether it holds wine or water. He closes his eyes again, not to return to sleep, but to keep the image from the glare of too much interpretation. When he opens them, the line of light at the window has thickened from thread to ribbon. The room is the room. The world is the world. And the man who has spent his life arranging questions so that they could ripen sits, ready to watch the last of them do so. The day breaks pale and clear. The kind of Athenian morning where the light seems to fall without haste, gliding down the whitewashed walls of the city like the slow spill of oil. In the prison, the early hour is marked not by bells or trumpets but by the muffled stirrings of the guards, the faint shuffle of feet in the corridor, the low murmur of voices not yet warmed by the day. Socrates has been awake for some time, not pacing, not restless, simply sitting with his back to the cool stone wall, his robe gathered loosely about him. He has the look of one waiting for an expected guest, though no announcement has yet come. He knows who it will be. The lock clicks, a sound at once metallic and wooden in this old place. The door opens wider than usual, admitting a figure who moves with quiet urgency. Crito steps into the cell. He is older than many of Socrates' friends, his hair gone mostly to grey, his shoulders still broad but carrying the weight of years and concern. His eyes are sharp and clear, but this morning they are shadowed, not by sleeplessness alone, but by a decision already made in his mind. The guard closes the door behind him, withdrawing to give them privacy. The small room feels even smaller with Crito's energy in it, like a sealed amphora filled too close to the brim. "Socrates," he begins, his voice low but insistent, "we must speak plainly. There is still a way for you to live." Socrates tilts his head, his expression calm, as though he has been invited to consider the rules of a new game. "Is that so?" "It is," Crito says. He takes a step closer, lowering himself onto the bench beside his friend. "Everything is prepared. I have spoken to the guards. The passage out of the city is secure. There is a ship waiting at Piraeus. We can have you away to Thessaly before the next moon is high." Socrates looks at him for a long moment, not with suspicion, but with the measured attention he might give to a student's argument. "And why?" he asks softly. "Do you think I should take this road?" Crito leans forward, elbows on his knees, his hands clasped. "Because your death will serve no good, and your life can still serve much. You have students who need you, friends who value your counsel. What will happen to them when your voice is gone? The men who condemned you will not care, but we will. Your children, Socrates, they will grow without you." The name of his children hangs in the air for a moment. Socrates does not flinch at it, but he lets the silence settle before speaking. "You know, Crito, that the care of a father is not measured only in his presence, but in the example he leaves. Would I teach them to honor justice by running from the law?" Crito's jaw tightens. "What justice is there in this? They have wronged you. The verdict was a mistake. No, worse, a crime against reason. You are under no obligation to submit to an unjust sentence." Socrates' voice remains even. "And yet I have lived under these laws all my life. I have walked freely in the agora. I have enjoyed the protection of the city. I have accepted its judgments when they favored me. If I choose now to disobey because the judgment does not please me, what does that make of my life's agreement with the law?" "But this is different," Crito insists. "You are no ordinary man. You are a teacher, a philosopher. If you die now, it will be a triumph for those who fear truth. They will say they were right to silence you. If you live, you can continue to question, to teach, perhaps even to change their minds in time." Socrates smiles faintly. "My friend, those who fear truth are not so easily changed by words. And what of the example I set for others? If I escape, what will the citizens say? That Socrates preached obedience to the law until it came for him, and then fled. Would that not give license to every man to obey the law only when it suits him?" Crito presses his palms together, as though holding back the frustration that trembles in him. "Then obey a higher law, the law of the good. If the city is wrong, it is your duty to resist it. Socrates looks toward the small slit of window, where a shaft of light now falls across the floor. Dust motes turn in it like thoughts circling a conclusion. I have thought much about this, Crito. If the city has done wrong, I will not correct it by doing wrong myself. To break the law now, in the name of saving my life, would be to harm the very thing I have spent my life defending, the idea that we must live justly, no matter the cost. Crito's shoulders sag. For a moment neither speaks. The sounds of the city seep faintly into the silence. The distant ring of a hammer, the call of a vendor setting up his stall, the coo of a pigeon somewhere beyond the wall. You would let them kill you? Crito asks finally, his voice quieter now, more a plea than a challenge. I would let them carry out what they believe is justice, Socrates says. Not because they are right, but because my own life must remain in harmony with itself. If I contradict my words with my actions, then what is the point of all I have taught? Crito shakes his head slowly, his eyes on the floor. It is hard to be your friend, Socrates. You make it impossible to save you. Socrates places a hand on his shoulder. And yet you have tried. That is the truest proof of friendship. You came to me not with comfort, but with action. That will not be forgotten. For a while they sit in companionable silence, as they have many times before, in shaded corners of the agora, on the long walk back from the gymnasium, in the cool hours after sunset when the city begins to rest. Crito's offer still hangs between them, unaccepted, but not unappreciated. When the guard returns to signal the end of visiting hours, Crito rises slowly. At the threshold he turns back. You are certain? As certain as I am that no man should harm another, even in return for harm. Crito nods, though it is not the nod of agreement. It is the nod of someone who has heard and will remember, even if his heart resists. He leaves without another word, the door closing behind him with a hollow thud. Socrates remains seated, the light in the cell shifting again as the sun climbs higher. He feels no triumph in his choice, no pride in his refusal, only the quiet, steady knowledge that it is the choice he can live and die with. The day after Crito's visit begins, not with the quiet solitude Socrates has grown accustomed to, but with the sound of more than one pair of footsteps approaching his cell. The steps are unhurried, yet deliberate, carrying the weight of men who know they will be speaking in low tones for hours to come. When the door opens, the first figure is Plato, carrying a small roll of parchment. Behind him is Apollodorus, whose open, earnest face always seems too quick to betray emotion, and then a few others. Euclides from Megara, Simmias from Thebes, Cebes with his thoughtful eyes. The guard lets them pass, with only a cursory glance. By now, these visitors have become familiar, and their purpose is understood, not to plot escape, but to keep company with the prisoner in his final days. The cell is small for so many bodies, yet the men arrange themselves with the quiet coordination of people used to long philosophical gatherings. Plato takes a place against the wall, already unrolling his parchment. Simmias and Cebes sit cross-legged on the floor near Socrates' bench. Apollodorus remains standing for a while, arms folded, as though unsure whether to join the others or simply stand as witness. Socrates greets each by name, his voice warm, without any trace of surprise at their arrival. It seems, he says, that even in prison a man may have a larger audience than he expects. Plato smiles faintly, but the mood in the room is sober. None of them has come here without the weight of the sentence in mind. Yet Socrates, as always, sets the tone. We have little time, and much to consider. He begins. Shall we waste the hours with complaints, or shall we make use of them in the way we always have, by asking what is worth knowing? A murmur of agreement moves through the group. They have come not to lament, but to learn. The soul and its fate. Plato poses the first question, perhaps because he feels the need to record Socrates' words accurately in these final days. Do you hold still, Socrates, that the soul survives the death of the body? Socrates nods. I do. Not as a certainty one can prove with a craftsman's tool, but as a conclusion that emerges when one examines the nature of life itself. The body is of the earth and returns to it. But the soul, that which reasons, that which loves, that which recognizes beauty and truth, has no weight, no shape, no decay. What is without parts cannot be scattered. Simmias leans forward. And if it is so, what is the soul's occupation when freed from the body? To seek still what it sought in life, Socrates replies. If it has loved truth, it will be in the company of truth. If it has loved shadows, it will wander among shadows until it learns otherwise. Cebes frowns slightly. Then the soul's preparation begins long before death. Indeed, Socrates says, to live well is to prepare for death, not in fear of it, but in readiness to meet it with the same curiosity one brings to a new question. A tangent on music. At this, Apollodorus finally speaks. And what of music? You have spoken before of its place in the care of the soul. Will it have music where it goes? Socrates smiles. Music is harmony made audible. The soul is harmony made invisible. Where one is in tune, the other follows. So yes, if there is music in the soul, there will be music beyond. He picks up the small lyre someone had left in the cell earlier in the week, running his fingers lightly over the strings. The sound is soft, almost tentative, but in the close space it lingers as if the stone itself has caught and held it. Philosophy is like tuning this lyre, he says. We make small adjustments over a lifetime, tightening here, loosening there, until the notes agree. At death, the instrument is taken away, but the harmony remains. On injustice and response, Cebes changes the subject. Socrates, many will see your death as an injustice. How should one live in a city where injustice can triumph? Socrates sets the lyre aside. By living justly oneself first, it is easier to rail against the wrongs of the world than to attend to the wrongs within one's own conduct. And when you meet injustice, meet it not with its likeness but with its opposite. To answer harm with harm is to become what you despise. Even if it means death? Simmias asks. Even then, Socrates says without hesitation. What is life worth if lived at the cost of one's own integrity? A memory from the war. For a moment he is silent, his gaze distant. Then he speaks again, but his voice has taken on a different timbre. Softer, reflective. I remember the siege at Potidæa, when the cold was so deep the sea itself seemed to stiffen at the edges. We held our ground for days without fire. Many were ready to surrender. But it was not courage that kept me from it. Only the thought that to yield to fear once makes it easier the next time. I think of the law in the same way. To obey it when convenient is no obedience at all. The room is quiet except for the faint scuff of Apollodorus shifting his weight. Each man there has known Socrates to use personal stories sparingly. When he does, it is less to instruct than to offer a glimpse of the life behind the questions. The turning of the sun hours pass like water through cupped hands. The sun climbs, spills light through the narrow window slit, and shifts in color as the afternoon approaches. The guard brings water and a small tray of figs and bread, which the men share without ceremony. In between bites, they return to their questions. They speak of virtue, whether it can be taught or only cultivated. They speak of courage, whether it is the absence of fear or the mastery of it. They speak of friendship, whether it is a mutual benefit or a shared commitment to the good. Socrates answers each question not with finality, but with another question tucked inside the answer, as though giving them a seed, rather than a finished fruit. If you leave here today with nothing more than certainty, he tells them, you will have learned little. Leave instead with the desire to keep asking, a moment of levity. At one point, Euclides, who has been quiet most of the morning, asks, do you think you will have the chance to question the heroes and wise men of old when you arrive where you are going? Socrates, eyes brighten with a flicker of humor. I certainly hope so. Imagine the conversation with Odysseus, to ask him if cunning was worth the years at sea. Or with Orpheus, if his lyre could truly charm the stones. I suspect they may try to avoid me, but I will find them. The others laugh, the sound mingling with the warm afternoon air. For a moment, the heaviness lifts, replaced by the familiar rhythm of their gatherings in the stoa, or the gymnasium. The parting words. As the sun begins to lower, casting the cell in the amber of early evening, Socrates grows quieter. He looks around at each face, lingering a little longer on Plato, who has been writing steadily. Remember, he says, philosophy is not a set of doctrines. It is the practice of caring for the soul through inquiry. You will hear my name twisted in the mouths of some, honored in the mouths of others. Pay no attention to either. Attend to the questions. They are the true teachers. The guard returns to signal the end of visiting hours. One by one, the men rise, some clasping his hand, others bowing their heads in silent acknowledgement. Apollodorus lingers at the door, his mouth opening as if to speak, but no words come. He leaves with the others. When the door closes and the cell is quiet again, the last light of day spills across the bench where Socrates sits. He closes his eyes, not in weariness but in the same calm readiness with which he began the morning. The harmony, he knows, is as tuned as it will ever be. The dawn is soft and almost reluctant, spilling pale light across the Piraeus like wine poured from a careful hand. The harbor wakes gradually, as it always does. First the gulls wheeling and calling over the dark water, then the creak of mooring ropes, then the low rumble of sailors' voices, muffled by the mist still curling between masts. From the walls above the harbor, one can see it, a shape emerging from the horizon, small at first, then gaining form with every rise and fall of the swell. The white sail catches the morning light, like a captured cloud, its edges fluttering faintly in the breeze. Even from this distance, the vessel's identity is unmistakable. The sacred ship has returned from Delos. To most Athenians it is a sight of pride and reassurance. The voyage is a ritual older than most men now alive. A yearly embassy sent to honor Apollo, in memory of the time when Theseus sailed to Crete, to end the tribute of youths demanded by the Minotaur. The ship itself is kept in meticulous repair, its timbers replaced when needed, but always preserving the same lines, the same graceful curve of the prow. To see it returning safely is to feel, for a moment, that the city's bond with the gods is unbroken. But to those who know the prisoner in the city prison, the sight carries another meaning, and a weight. For during the ship's voyage, no execution may take place, by ancient custom. The return of the sacred vessel signals that the prohibition will soon be lifted. At the harbor, the dockworkers pause in their labors to watch it approach, the steady rhythm of its oars visible now, the figurehead at the prow gleaming with fresh paint. Children run along the quay, calling to each other, their laughter mingling with the slap of water against stone. Merchants, too, leave their stalls for a moment to look, some shading their eyes against the rising sun. "It's early this year," one man says to another. "A good wind," the other replies. "The gods favored them." There is no mention of Socrates between them, but the thought of him flickers at the edges of the conversation, as it does across the city today. Word of the ship's approach will travel quickly up from the Piraeus to the agora, to the council chambers, to the prison. The city reacts by mid-morning. The news has reached the heart of Athens. In the shaded colonnades of the agora, men speak of it openly now. Some do so with satisfaction. "It will be over soon," says a potter arranging his wares. "The city can move on." Others speak more quietly, as though their words might carry farther than intended. "He'll drink the hemlock before the next sunrise," an old man murmurs to his companion. "And then what will they say of us?" The temples are busier than usual. Perhaps it is coincidence. Perhaps not. Citizens bring small offerings, a measure of grain, a sprig of laurel, a coin left at the altar, giving thanks for the ship's safe return, or perhaps seeking favor for something else entirely. In the prison, in the dim corridor outside Socrates' cell, the footsteps of the guard sound different today, less idle, more deliberate. News travels quickly among them, too. The ship's arrival means the waiting is nearly done. A young guard, perhaps newer to the post, lingers by the open door as he brings the philosopher his morning water. "They say the sail is already furled," he offers, as if this were simply a fact of interest, and not the herald of the man's final day. Socrates receives the cup, drinks slowly, and sets it aside. "A good omen for Athens," he says. His tone is even, neither ironic nor bitter. "May the city keep its course as well as that ship has kept hers." The guard hesitates, perhaps expecting more, some expression of fear, some plea. When none comes, he nods and leaves, his sandals whispering away down the hall. The symbol and the sentence for Socrates, the ship's return, is not a surprise. He has been counting the days in his own mind, measuring them not by the turn of a calendar but by the light in the cell and the visits of his friends. Still, the knowledge that the moment has moved from distant certainty to near reality sharpens the edges of the hours. He recalls the ship itself, seen many times in years past as it set out on its voyage. The garlands on its prow, the crew chosen for their skill and piety, the way the city turned out to watch it depart. He thinks of the myth behind it, how Theseus sailed to Crete to end a cycle of death, and how that voyage is now marked by a ritual that, in his own case, will end in death, rather than avert it. The irony is not lost on him, but neither does it trouble him. The city keeps its customs. He will keep his. Conversations in the agora back in the marketplace. A small knot of younger men speak in low voices near the edge of a colonnade. They are former students, though not all have dared visit Socrates in prison. "It's true," says one, eyes fixed on the stones at his feet. "The ship docked this morning," another shakes his head. "I thought there might be more time." "What difference would it make?" the first asks. "He won't run. You know that." "I know," the second replies, "but knowing doesn't make it easier." They part without further words, each turning back to the business of the day, though their steps are slower, their thoughts elsewhere. The procession. By afternoon, the ship has been drawn up and secured, its timbers creak as they settle against the dock, the ropes humming faintly in the breeze. A small procession winds its way from the harbor up into the city, the priests, the crew, the officials who oversaw the voyage. They carry the offerings brought back from Delos, symbols of the city's devotion and its link to the divine. Crowds gather to watch, some for the pageantry, some for the reassurance that tradition endures. Children tug at their mothers' sleeves, pointing at the bright cloths and polished vessels carried in the procession. Few speak aloud of the other, unspoken duty that now falls back upon the city with the ship's return. Evening in the cell. As the sun dips lower, the light in the prison turns amber, throwing long shadows across the stone. Socrates sits with Plato and a few others, their conversation winding through familiar territory, the nature of the soul, the meaning of virtue, but now with a softness, as if the words are being placed gently where they will be remembered. When a pause comes, Socrates glances toward the window slit, where the last of the day's light is fading. "The ship has returned," he says, more as a statement of shared knowledge than of news. Plato nods. "It has." "Then tomorrow," Socrates says, "we will see if the harmony holds." No one asks what he means. They understand. He speaks not only of the city's laws but of his own. Night falls outside, the city quiets, the clamor of the marketplace replaced by the lower hum of evening life, the clink of cups in taverns, the murmur of conversation spilling from open doorways, the faint strains of a lyre drifting down an alley. In the harbor, the sacred ship rests at anchor, its white sail furled, its voyage complete. In the prison, the air is still. The guards speak softly in the corridor, their words indistinct. In his cell, Socrates lies back on the bench, eyes open to the shadowed ceiling. The return of the ship has brought the end into sharp focus, but it has not altered the shape of his thoughts. He has always known the course, as clearly as a captain knows the route of a familiar harbor. Tomorrow, the tide will carry him out. Tonight, he rests in the quiet between journeys. The morning after the sacred ship's return is clear. With the kind of crystalline light Athens is known for in spring, the streets are already busy when Xanthippe makes her way toward the prison, her robe gathered in one hand to keep it from brushing the dust of the narrow lanes. Two of their sons walk beside her, Lamprocles, the eldest, his face drawn into a serious set beyond his years, and the younger one, Menexenos, who clings to her hand as though afraid the crowd might sweep him away. Their third child, still too young to understand, remains at home with a neighbor. The closer they come to the prison, the quieter their steps become, the voices in the street fading into the background hum of the city. Xanthippe's pace is steady, but her eyes are fixed ahead, unwilling to meet the curious glances of those who know where she is going and why. She has not visited often during the trial, not because she lacked the will, but because Socrates himself urged her to keep the boys from the shadow of the proceedings. Yet now, on what is likely the final day, she has come. At the gate, the guard at the entrance recognizes her and steps aside without challenge. There is a faint shift in his posture, an almost imperceptible softening of the face, but he says nothing as he opens the inner door. The family steps into the dim corridor, where the smell of stone and iron wraps around them like a cold breath. Another guard leads them down the narrow passage, the echo of their footsteps marking the slow approach. Menexenos tightens his grip on his mother's hand, his small eyes scanning the walls as though trying to see through them. Lamprocles walks a half step ahead, his jaw set, perhaps determined to show his father, and himself, that he can bear this. The first glance, when they reach the cell, Socrates is already seated on the bench, his robe neatly arranged, his back straight. He rises as they enter, and for a moment, the philosopher is simply a husband and father greeting his family. His eyes soften when they meet Xanthippe's and then move to each boy in turn. "Xanthippe," he says quietly, "you've come." She nods, her lips pressed tightly together. Words, for now, would be too fragile. Socrates bends slightly to Menexenos, offering his hand. The boy takes it without hesitation, his small fingers wrapping around the calloused ones that have held spear and stylus alike. He lifts his other hand to touch the edge of his father's robe, as if to confirm he is real, not a story or a voice from the past. Small talk in a heavy room. They sit together on the bench, Xanthippe beside him, the boys on either side. The room feels smaller than ever, the air holding the warmth of too many breaths, and the weight of too much left unsaid. Socrates asks after the household, the neighbors, the olive tree in the courtyard. Xanthippe answers simply, her voice steady. She speaks of the vines beginning to bud, the hens that have taken to wandering beyond their coop, the neighbor's goat that keeps finding its way into the garden. These small things are anchors, moments of normal life, brought into a space where normality is foreign. The boys listen, sometimes glancing at their father, sometimes at the floor. Lamprocles nods once or twice, though his mind is clearly elsewhere. Menexenos leans against Socrates' arm, the fabric of the robe gathered in his fist, the turn to seriousness. After a while, the conversation shifts as it must. Socrates looks to Lamprocles, his voice still gentle but more deliberate now. My son, you are nearly a man. Soon you will walk the streets as your own master. Remember this. You will be judged not only by your words but by the harmony between your words and your deeds. If they match, you will need no defense before any jury. Lamprocles swallows, his eyes flicking upward to meet his father's gaze. And if they do not match? Socrates' expression does not change. Then you will have become a stranger to yourself, and that is a far greater punishment than any the city can give. He turns to Menexenos, lowering his tone even further. And you, little one, must remember to listen as much as you speak. Ask questions, yes, but not to trap others. Ask because you wish to understand. That is the beginning of wisdom. The boy nods solemnly, though whether he fully grasped the meaning or only the gravity in his father's voice, Xanthippe cannot tell. A moment alone, Socrates glances toward the guard at the doorway. The man, reading the silent request, steps back into the corridor, leaving them with a measure of privacy. The air shifts subtly, the absence of a stranger allowing the room to feel more like a home for a few stolen moments. Xanthippe takes his hand. I have tried, she says, her voice low but steady, to keep the household as you would wish it. But I do not know how to explain to them why you must. Her voice catches but she steadies it. Why you must not come home. Socrates' thumb brushes lightly across her knuckles. Tell them that their father chose to live as he spoke, that to come home by breaking the law would have been to teach them that a man's words are only as strong as his fear. I would rather they remember me for keeping my word than for keeping my life. Her eyes shine, but she does not weep. She has wept enough in the weeks past, alone in the night when the boys could not see. Now there is only this time, and she will not let it dissolve into grief before it must. The boys, questions Lamprocles, breaks the silence. Father, are you afraid? Socrates looks at him, not with surprise, but with the calm of one who has asked himself the same question. I do not know what comes after death. But I know that fearing what I do not know would not help me meet it any better. Fear clouds the mind, and I wish to meet whatever comes with a clear one. Menexenos presses closer. Will we see you again? Socrates rests his hand on the boy's head. I believe so, though perhaps not as you see me now. The soul, I think, goes on. And where there is love, there is a way for souls to meet again. The boy nods slowly, as though tucking the thought away like a small treasure. The farewell, the guard's footsteps return, soft but certain. The time is nearly gone. Xanthippe rises, the boys following. She looks at him one last time, and in that look is the full weight of decades. The early years when they had nothing but each other, the quiet evenings in the courtyard, the mornings of laughter, the long absences when he wandered Athens speaking to any who would listen. She does not kiss him. Not here, not now, but she places her hand against his cheek for a heartbeat. Goodbye, my husband. He smiles, not as a man denying the parting, but as one accepting it fully. Goodbye, my wife. Raise them to seek what is true. Lamprocles steps forward and clasps his father's forearm in the manner of a grown man. Menexenos wraps both arms around him, burying his face in the robe. Socrates holds them each in turn, not too long, not too briefly, with the perfect measure of a man who has always known that love is not in length but in depth. When they leave, the cell feels quieter than before, though the air is no different. Socrates sits once more on the bench. the warmth of their presence lingering, like the last light after sunset. The prison is quieter than usual that afternoon. Even the murmur of the guards in the corridor seems to have thinned, their conversations dropping to half sentences, then to silence. Outside the day is bright and windless, the air so still that the distant ring of a hammer on the Piraeus shipyards carries faintly all the way up into the city. In his cell, Socrates sits with his back to the wall, his robe drawn loosely around his shoulders, his bare feet resting on the cool stone floor. The light from the narrow window slit is narrow and sharp now, a pale blade cutting diagonally across the room, slowly climbing the opposite wall as the sun sinks lower. He has been watching its movement without urgency, the way one might watch the shadow of a sundial, not for the telling of hours, but to feel the day passing as something tangible. The sound of approach. Somewhere deeper in the prison a door opens. The noise is small but distinct, the sound of wood shifting against iron hinges. Footsteps follow, slow, measured, with the faint scuff of sandals. The rhythm is deliberate, not the brisk stride of a guard delivering food or messages, but the pace of men moving with a purpose they neither rush nor delay. The steps draw nearer, joined by a faint, unfamiliar sound, the clink of pottery against wood, the soft rattle of liquid in a vessel. Socrates closes his eyes briefly, breathing in once through his nose, as if marking the transition from thought to readiness, the official and the servant. The door opens. In the threshold stands one of the prison officials, a man whose face is solemn but not hostile. Behind him is another, an older attendant with a stooped back and weathered hands, holding a small wooden tray. Upon the tray rests a shallow clay bowl, a pestle, and a folded cloth. The attendant nods once, a small, almost deferential gesture, before kneeling just inside the doorway. The official speaks, his tone flat but not unkind. "The time has come, Socrates." Socrates inclines his head, as though acknowledging a simple truth. "I understand." The preparation begins. The attendant sets the tray on the floor near the wall where the light falls. He unfolds the cloth, revealing a small bundle of dried plants. The slender, gray-green stems and small leaves of the hemlock, brittle now, but still carrying the faint bitter scent of their poison. With practiced hands he begins to crush them in the bowl, the pestle moving in slow circles. The sound is soft but insistent, a granular rhythm that fills the room. Socrates watches without leaning forward, his eyes steady on the motion. There is no ceremony in the man's movements, yet there is precision, as though the act itself demands respect for its consequences. The crushed leaves release a sharper scent as they break, something between celery and metal, pungent enough to curl at the back of the throat. The attendant pauses to add a small measure of water from a clay jug, the liquid darkening as it mixes with the green paste. He works the pestle again, drawing the poison into the water, until it becomes a murky, opaque drink. The guard's eyes. One of the younger guards stands in the doorway, his eyes fixed on the floor. His knuckles rest white against the frame, as though the weight of simply standing here requires effort. When he glances up, it is not at Socrates, but at the bowl, as if to measure how near the preparation is to completion. Socrates notices, but says nothing. His gaze returns to the pestle, to the steady motion that is now smoothing the liquid, erasing the last fragments of leaf until only the dark, thickened drink remains. The final pour. The attendant takes up a small clay cup from the tray, its surface unglazed and rough to the touch. He tips the bowl, letting the liquid flow slowly into the cup. It moves sluggishly, coating the sides before settling into stillness. A thin residue clings to the bowl. The man wipes it away with the edge of the cloth, ensuring every measure is given. He sets the filled cup on the tray, then rises to his feet with care, as though the contents are not simply dangerous but delicate. Socrates. Acceptance. The official steps forward and takes the cup from the tray, holding it in both hands. He looks at Socrates, not searching for resistance, but almost as though seeking permission. "When you are ready," he says. Socrates extends his hand. His fingers close around the cup without hesitation, feeling the slight warmth from the man's hands still in the clay. He holds it for a moment, studying the opaque liquid. The smell is sharp, bitter, unmistakable. "Tell me," Socrates asks mildly, "is it customary to drink it all at once, or in sips?" "All at once," the official replies, his voice low. "So that it may work quickly." Socrates nods. "A kindness then." A pause before the act. He does not raise the cup immediately. Instead, he looks around the room, at the wall where the sunlight has climbed almost to the ceiling, at the faint lines of wear on the stone floor, at the faces of those present. There is no drama in his gaze, only an attentive noticing, as though committing the small details to memory for no one but himself. Finally, he speaks. I have been told that this drink will first numb my feet, then climb upward until it reaches my heart. If that is so, then I will know, at each step, exactly where I stand on the path. The official does not answer. The guard at the doorway swallows hard. The attendant lowers his eyes. Lifting the cup, Socrates shifts slightly, drawing the robe more neatly around his shoulders. He cradles the cup in both hands now, lifting it with the same calm as a man taking wine at a friend's table. There is no trembling. The rim touches his lips. The liquid is bitter and earthy, coating his tongue in a heaviness that resists swallowing. Yet he does not pause. One steady breath, one tilt of the wrist, and the cup is empty. Setting it down, he lowers the cup and turns it in his fingers once, as though noting the texture anew. Then he sets it back on the tray, upright and clean-edged against the wood. There, he says softly, it is done. The official bows his head slightly. The attendant collects the tray, moving with the same careful steps as before, though now the weight he carries is lighter and heavier all at once. The first sign, Socrates shifts on the bench, resting his hands on his knees. I can already feel it, he remarks, his voice matter-of-fact. A coolness in the ankles, as though I had stepped into a shallow stream in winter. The younger guard glances up sharply at this, but Socrates' expression is unchanged. Calm, observant, even faintly curious. Silence returns. The room falls into quiet again, the kind that comes not from a lack of things to say, but from the knowledge that all the important things have been said already. Outside, the day continues as if untouched. The marketplace hums, the harbor bustles, the streets carry the footsteps of citizens, unaware of the exact moment unfolding here. In the cell, the sunlight has begun to fade from the wall, its bright blade narrowing, the edge softening. Socrates sits upright, breathing evenly, his gaze fixed on nothing in particular. The cup, empty now, rests on the tray like an ordinary vessel, though everyone present knows it has just been the most consequential cup in Athens. The cup has been emptied. The clay sits on the tray now, harmless in appearance, yet its purpose has already passed into the body of the man who set it down. For a time, Socrates remains seated, his hands resting lightly on his knees, his breathing calm. There is no visible urgency in him, no sign that he intends to rise. And yet the air in the cell changes. Subtly at first, as if everyone present has shifted their attention inward, listening for a sound that has not yet arrived. The first weight, Socrates tilts his head, almost as if listening to his own body. There it is again, he murmurs, the coolness rising, first at the ankles, now in the calves, not unpleasant, but undeniable. He flexes his toes inside the robe's hem. They do not respond quite as before. The movement is slower, more deliberate, as though the command takes longer to travel. He nods, as if confirming some private observation. Rising from the bench, when he moves to stand, it is with care, not because of fear, but because he knows the path ahead is short and should not be hurried. His palms press against the bench's edge, the stone cool under his skin. He pushes himself upright, feeling the subtle shift in balance as the numbness climbs. The guard by the door instinctively takes a half-step forward, then stops. He knows Socrates needs no assistance, yet something in the movement, the elder man's deliberate rise, triggers the human urge to steady. The room in detail standing now, Socrates takes in the room as though seeing it fresh. The walls are plain, pitted by age. The narrow window slit admits a thin beam of light, dust drifting lazily in it. In the far corner, the attendant still holds the tray, his eyes downcast, not from shame, but from the quiet gravity of his role. The sunlight no longer cuts the wall sharply. It has softened into a warm haze, the day leaning toward evening. In this light, even the worn stone seems gentle. The first step, Socrates shifts his weight forward, and takes a step. The sole of his foot meets the stone, but the sensation is muted, as though the floor is cushioned in a layer of cold water. He notes it without comment. Another step follows, slower this time, his heel touching down with more care. The sound is small. A soft scrape of skin on stone, the whisper of fabric. And yet, in the stillness of the cell, Each footfall feels amplified, as if marking the passing of time itself. The circle of witnesses, his friends, who have been allowed to remain for these last moments, stand close to the walls, giving him the space to move freely. Each face is different, some tight with grief, some calm but pale, some struggling to meet his gaze at all. Socrates offers them each a glance, not lingering, but steady enough to acknowledge their presence. No one speaks. The silence is not oppressive, it is reverent.
Halfway across. At the midpoint between bench and wall, he pauses. His robe sways slightly from the momentum of his movement. He shifts his weight again and speaks, not to anyone in particular. The coolness is at my knees now. My legs feel heavier, as though walking through shallow snow. He gives a faint smile, not mocking the situation but finding something human in describing it. The official makes a small note on a wax tablet, though his hand trembles slightly, turning toward the light. Instead of walking directly to the bed, Socrates turns toward the wall where the light falls. He stands there a moment, lifting his face into the beam. Dust motes drift between him and the light, each one catching gold before fading back into shadow. The numbness creeps further upward. His thighs feel distant now, not absent, but slow to answer his will. He tests them with a slight bend of the knee, and the motion comes, deliberate, careful. The last steps. He turns again toward the low bed set against the wall. Each step now is more deliberate, his feet placed with measured certainty. There is no stumble, no falter, only the slowness of a man who knows the distance is nearly gone. The bed is simple, a low frame, a thin pallet, a folded cloth at the head. He reaches it and turns to sit. The movement requires more effort than before. His legs obey, but sluggishly. He lowers himself, using both hands on the frame for balance. Seated once more, Socrates leans back slightly, exhaling in a slow, even breath. Now it is at my hips, he says, almost conversationally. The body becomes heavier, but the mind remains light. His hands rest on his thighs, fingers relaxed. The poison works upward without pause, an unseen tide. The quiet exchange. One of his closest companions, Crito, steps forward, his eyes searching Socrates' face. "Is there anything left undone, Socrates?" The philosopher meets his gaze. "Only this, to meet the end as I have met each day without complaint." Crito nods once, swallowing hard. The watcher's stillness. No one in the room moves now except Socrates himself, and even his movements are small, adjusting the fall of his robe, resting his arm more comfortably along the bed's edge. The guards have stepped back a pace, giving the moment a strange intimacy, as though the cell is no longer a place of confinement but a private chamber. The numbness at the waist. Socrates remarks again, "It reaches my waist now. Soon the heart will follow." His voice is steady, the tone almost like a lecturer closing his notes after a long discourse. His companions watch his face as though memorizing every line, every shift of expression. The last adjustment. He lies back now, slowly, with help from the official who steps forward just enough to steady his shoulder. Socrates does not resist, does not quicken the motion. It is as if he wants each moment to have its full measure. Once reclined, he exhales again, the breath soft, as though settling deeper into the bed. His feet, now entirely without sensation, rest lightly against the pallet. The final statement before stillness. With his head turned slightly toward the narrow window, he says quietly, "This is the natural end of the body, but not of the self. Remember this, my friends, that we are not these limbs nor this breath. We are the mind that uses them, and that mind does not die here." The words hang in the room like the fading vibration of a plucked string. The room is utterly still. The low hum of the city beyond the walls might as well belong to another world. Inside these stone confines, time feels suspended, every second stretched and softened like ripples on a quiet pond. Socrates lies as he settled moments before, head turned slightly toward the thin beam of fading light. His eyes remain open, their gaze fixed not on the wall before him, but somewhere past it, as though following a thought into a distance only he can see. The slow ascent of the poison. The official, who has remained silently attentive, leans forward just enough to touch Socrates' foot with his hand. He presses lightly, then a bit more firmly. There is no reaction. He moves his hand higher, to the calf, then the thigh, the same stillness. He turns to those gathered and speaks softly. When the cold reaches the heart, it will be finished. His voice is professional, but there is a faint break in it, quickly masked. The final words. Socrates inhales gently, the breath audible but thin. "Crito," he says, his voice quieter now, yet perfectly clear. "We owe a cock to Asclepius. See that it is paid. Do not forget." Crito leans in, his brow furrowed with the weight of the moment. "It will be done, Socrates. I will see to it myself." A faint smile touches Socrates' lips. Not amusement, but relief. Good. The pause before the end. He closes his eyes for a moment, then opens them again, as though reluctant to waste even a second of sight. The room is the same. The worn stone, the narrow window, the faces of friends. But to him it is now bathed in the clarity of final moments. The numbness climbs higher, unseen but relentless. His chest rises and falls, each breath slower than the last, as if the body is deciding it has done enough. The breath that lingers. The next exhale is long, almost sigh-like. It hangs in the air longer than seems possible, a single thread stretching between presence and absence. For a moment, it is unclear whether another breath will follow. Then, one more, small, shallow, like the last ripple before still water. The stillness. There is no sound now except the faint shifting of fabric as someone moves closer. Crito leans in, but the philosopher's eyes are fixed in that same distant gaze, unfocused now. His chest does not rise again. The official reaches gently for Socrates' wrist. His fingers rest there for several moments, feeling for a pulse he knows he will not find. He nods once, solemnly. The first moments after. No one speaks immediately. There is an instinct, shared without discussion, that words would be too sharp for such a fragile silence. Instead, they remain where they are, each man fixed in his own thoughts. Some look at Socrates' face, others at the floor, unable to meet the stillness directly. Crito, after a long pause, reaches to adjust the philosopher's robe, straightening the folds, smoothing them over his chest. It is a small act, but one that seems to reclaim dignity from the finality of death. The window, and the light, the sunbeam through the window has shifted. It no longer touches the bed directly, but spills instead across the wall just above it, a pale, warm glow that will fade entirely within minutes. Dust still dances in it, catching gold before disappearing into shadow. It seems fitting that even the light is moving on. The departure. One by one, they step back from the bed. The guards, respectful now, make no effort to rush them. They understand. The body may be still, but the moment is not yet finished. It must be allowed to settle. Crito is the last to turn toward the door. He pauses, looks once more at his friend, and bows his head slightly before following the others out. The empty room. In the absence of people, the cell feels larger. The bench, the low bed, the small table, all seem somehow more pronounced without the presence that had animated them. The air is still, the stone cold, the light fading, but there is also a sense of release, as though the room itself has exhaled. Reflection. History will tell this story again and again, in books, in lectures, in the whispered debates of philosophers yet unborn. They will argue over the justice of it, the wisdom of it, the necessity of it. But here Now, in this moment, there is no argument, only the reality that a man has met his end in accordance with the principles he lived by, and in doing so, has left behind not just questions, but a way of facing the inevitable with unshaken calm. Socrates has gone. The city beyond the walls still hums with life, unaware of the precise moment it lost one of its most troublesome and most beloved voices. And in the quiet of this small, unremarkable cell, the truth settles. Some deaths echo longer than others.